The German non-commissioned officer was glancing at the time, completely unaware that 200 projectiles were about to strike simultaneously. Silence reigned. No thunder from distant cannons, no telltale shrieking of incoming ordnance. One moment his troops were consuming their chilled provisions within their dugouts near St-Lô. In the blink of an eye, the ground detonated everywhere at once, and soldiers who were upright simply ceased to exist. Trucks were tossed skyward like toys, while the sheer force of the blast rendered combatants unconscious even 50 meters away from where the rounds hit. Those lucky enough to claw their way out of the debris suffered from more than physical injuries. Their minds were completely broken. In less time than it takes for a heart to beat, their entire world was irrevocably altered. There was no crescendo, no opportunity to take cover. The German military machine did not operate this way, and indeed no military on Earth operated this way. They had just fallen victim to a strategy the United States forces had been refining for 10 years. It was an instrument of war so destructive that enemy commanders would later confess it was their greatest nightmare, surpassing the fear of armored divisions, aerial bombardment, or even the Soviet front. To truly grasp why this American capability instilled such dread, one must appreciate the standard mechanics of indirect fire. Conventional barrages invariably began with registration rounds where a unit would discharge a solitary shell or two. Spotters would note the impact point, allowing crews to correct their coordinates before unleashing the full volley. This procedure was time-consuming, and critically it alerted the adversary. Those initial explosions served as a herald of the destruction to follow. Defenders were granted precious moments to scramble into trenches, slide beneath transport trucks, or press themselves against the soil. Those fleeting ticks of the clock were far more vital than one might assume. The United States military analyzed reaction times under fire and found that when the first shell hit, 58% of troops in a defensive posture were still upright. Merely 9% were safely prone behind cover, but within 2 seconds of the initial blast, those statistics flipped completely. By the 8-second mark, every last man was hugging the terrain, utilizing whatever shelter was available. The arithmetic was stark. An attack offering 8 seconds of notice was 66% less deadly than one arriving as a complete surprise. During the 1930s, American artillery commanders became obsessed with a singular query. Could the warning be eliminated entirely? The solution emerged from the plains of Oklahoma. Fort Sill had served as the premier hub for American gunnery instruction since 1911. While much of the military languished during the interwar period, a small group of visionaries at this post were silently transforming the science of bombardment. Major Carlos Brewer joined the gunnery department in the late 1920s, bringing with him some drastic theories. He believed American methods were sluggish, unwieldy, and tethered to obsolete World War I tactics, proposing instead a system to render fire support nearly instantaneous. His replacement, Major Orlando Ward, advanced the theory significantly. Ward established an entity known as the Fire Direction Center. Rather than individual batteries computing their own targeting data, a unified command hub would synchronize every weapon in the sector at once. The consequences of this shift were groundbreaking. If a single brain controlled scores of cannons and the math was processed swiftly, each barrel could discharge at a varying time yet achieve simultaneous impact on a single coordinate. No registration fire, no corrections, and absolutely no notice. The German forces, indeed the entire world, had never witnessed such a technique, which was conceptually brilliant. Actually performing the feat, however, was incredibly difficult, as every projectile travels along a specific parabolic curve. A 105mm howitzer positioned 3 miles out might require a flight duration of 45 seconds, whereas a 155mm gun 5 miles away might need 60 seconds. A heavy 8-inch piece further afield could take 90 seconds or longer. Synchronizing these flight times was dubbed time on target by the troops. Each crew had to pull the lanyard at a specific second to ensure all rounds landed within a 3-second interval. The synchronization relied on a radio broadcast countdown. Control centers transmitted the master time to every unit. Crews watched their chronometers, and at the appointed mark, the distant heavy artillery fired first. Moments later, the medium-range batteries joined in, followed finally by the nearest cannons, adding their weight to the gathering tempest. The objective remained silent until the very end, creating a phenomenon that baffled German infantry. One hears the chirping of a bird or the rustle of the breeze, and then in a fraction of a second, the entire landscape detonates. Commanders rapidly realized that the mental trauma inflicted was just as potent as the kinetic damage. Captured personnel invariably shared the same sentiment. The quietude preceding a time-on-target volley was the most harrowing aspect of all. The opposition was capable of the arithmetic. Any skilled gunner understood the physics of trajectory. It was the sheer velocity of the American execution that they simply could not replicate. Within the operational framework of the German military, a surprise assault from the flank enjoyed a window of safety lasting 10 to 12 minutes before precise bombardment could commence. This duration represented the necessary interval for their batteries to process targeting data, compute the complex mathematics of trajectory, and physically align their cannons. In stark contrast, American gunners could unleash hell in fewer than 3 minutes, a disparity born from the seamless marriage of superior technology and innovative tactical doctrine. General Jacob Devers, a visionary in the realm of armored combat, had keenly observed the FM radio systems utilized by the Connecticut State Police in their cruisers. Recognizing their potential, he successfully persuaded military leadership to engineer similar FM transmitters specifically for forward observation teams. The outcome was crystal clear transmission between the vanguard and fire control centers, maintained flawlessly even as units maneuvered across the battlefield. Conversely, German spotters were tethered to fragile telephone wires which were frequently severed by the chaos of incoming shrapnel. American spotters embedded directly alongside infantrymen relayed coordinates instantaneously via wireless radio. By the year 1944, an American company under duress could summon a curtain of protective fire within 3 minutes of the initial engagement. The German forces required a full 12 minutes to mount an equivalent reply, a delay of 9 crucial minutes that exacted a toll of thousands of lives. However, the chasm separating American and German capabilities extended far beyond mere tactical maneuvers. It represented a collision between two distinct eras of warfare. While American positions buzzed with the mechanical hum of diesel motors and radio-static German columns echoed with the clatter of horse hooves waging a modern conflict with supply lines reminiscent of the Napoleonic age. To compound their difficulties, the Wehrmacht relied heavily on scavenged weaponry from every nation they had subjugated. General Hans Eberbach, commanding the 5th Panzer Army in Normandy, noted that his arsenal was a patchwork of artillery from every major European power. His inventory included French 75s, Czech howitzers, Polish field pieces, and Soviet guns seized from the Eastern Front. Every unique weapon demanded its own specific ammunition, distinct ballistic charts, and specialized maintenance protocols. The logistical burden was nothing short of a nightmare. Certain batteries stood silent simply because the appropriate shells had failed to arrive. The Americans, on the other hand, deployed a standardized arsenal supported by a boundless supply of munitions and pre-calculated firing data for any contingency. In the Normandy theatre, the British forces alone possessed 6 times the artillery volume available to Eberbach. When accounting for the American contribution, the disparity was even greater, a fact that German officers fully grasped as they realized they were hopelessly outmatched. Yet what eluded their understanding until they faced it directly was the absolute mastery the Americans had achieved in the science of coordinated bombardment. This formidable American system underwent its baptism of fire in North Africa during the latter part of 1942. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel found himself thoroughly impressed despite his adversarial stance. Writing to his wife on February 18, 1943, he detailed the combat dynamics during the early skirmishes in Tunisia. He noted how a single observation aircraft had orchestrated the fire of multiple batteries upon every significant target across the sector. Rommel observed that the Americans were delivering precise bombardments with a speed that outpaced his own force's ability to react. Having battled the British for 2 years, the Desert Fox was well acquainted with the capabilities of Allied guns. Yet the American methodology presented a novel challenge. It was not merely the sheer volume of fire, though they possessed that in abundance, but rather the intricate coordination. It was the ability of numerous batteries to converge upon a single point with synchronized precision. While the American troops at Kasserine Pass were inexperienced and prone to error, occasionally faltering under German assault, their artillery support remained steadfast. Even as infantry lines were breached, the cannons continued their relentless barrage. German offensives were halted by sudden curtains of steel that materialized seemingly out of thin air, a phenomenon that Rommel's veterans quickly noted. Consequently, they developed a healthy respect for American artillery long before they accorded the same regard to the infantry. By June of 1944, this system had been honed into a lethal instrument. Meanwhile, the hedgerows of Normandy should have offered a defensive utopia for the Germans. Every field was enclosed by earthen berms crowned with thick vegetation, providing ideal concealment for defenders while creating deadly traps for the encroaching forces. The American infantry faced immense difficulties navigating the bocage. Armor failed to penetrate the dense hedging, and progress was agonizingly slow, measured in yards daily and purchased with blood, yet the artillery corps continued to evolve. Forward observers devised innovative methods to direct fire onto concealed positions beyond their direct line of sight. Overhead spotter aircraft circled vigilantly, guiding battery fire onto clusters of German troops. At Hill 192 near Saint-Lô, the 2nd Infantry Division confronted dug-in German defenders who had successfully rebuffed every prior assault. In a bold strategic move, the division artillery commander orchestrated 20 distinct time-on-target missions within the span of a single night. Every few hours, seemingly secure, German fortifications would erupt in synchronized explosions, denying the defenders any chance of rest. Unable to resupply or rotate their fatigued personnel, they found even their rear echelons subjected to the same devastating bombardment. By daybreak, German resistance had completely collapsed, the psychological impact proving just as decisive as the physical toll. On July 25, 1944, the United States Army provided a definitive demonstration of the devastation unleashed when air superiority and artillery fire operate in perfect concert. Operation Cobra was the masterstroke intended to finally shatter the deadlock in Normandy. General Omar Bradley sought to focus an overwhelming magnitude of force upon a slender segment of the front line. The overture commenced at 9:38 in the morning as more than 1,500 heavy bombers released their payloads upon German fortifications west of Saint-Lô. Medium bombers followed in their wake, succeeded immediately by waves of fighter bombers. When the smoke finally drifted away, the artillery began its work to suppress any remaining movement. More than 1,100 guns roared to life with over 140,000 shells earmarked for the 7th Corps alone. The German units occupying that sector were effectively erased as a cohesive fighting force. General Fritz Bayerlein commanded the elite Panzer Division, widely regarded as one of the premier armoured formations in the Wehrmacht. His troops were seasoned veterans of the Eastern Front men, who had endured the ferocity of Soviet barrages and British bombing raids. Yet nothing in their experience could have steeled them for an apocalypse of this magnitude. Bayerlein's after-action report depicted the joint devastation of bombs and shells in terms that unsettled even the most battle-hardened staff officers. He described carpets of bombs rolling relentlessly toward them, with explosions erupting mere yards away, while a pall of dust and fountains of earth were hurled high into the sky. The entire landscape was transformed into a cratered moonscape where everything was scorched and obliterated, and his tanks lay overturned. His lines of communication were severed and his command posts pulverized, but it was not merely the physical ruin that shattered his men. It was the sheer sense of helplessness. Bayerlein reported that the survivors began to behave like madmen. Soldiers were found trembling without control, rendered mute, and unable to even grip a weapon. He remarked that in his view, hell itself could not rival what they had endured. This was a German general who had campaigned across Europe for 5 years, yet he was not likening this battle to the Russian front. He was equating it to eternal damnation. The Panzer Division, the very armoured force relied upon to drive the Americans back into the ocean, lost nearly 50% of its combat strength in a single morning. Moreover, Operation Cobra was merely the opening act. The German defensive line did not simply buckle under the pressure, it disintegrated. American armor flooded through the breach, and within days, General Patton's Third Army was sprinting across France, traversing distances that appeared logistically impossible. German units attempting to withdraw found themselves hounded by ceaseless artillery harassment. American forward observers traveled with the vanguard, directing fire upon any gathering of enemy troops or vehicles they spotted. The advance moved with such speed that artillery battalions were forced to leapfrog their positions simply to maintain firing range. However, the fire direction system was engineered specifically for this type of fluid chaos. Batteries could move, deploy, and calculate new firing data within minutes. German defenders attempting to set up roadblocks found that American shells were raining down before they could even break ground for foxholes. It seemed as though the artillery was omnipresent. By August, the German army in France was in a state of total collapse. Entire divisions were annihilated in the Falaise pocket, trapped in a crossfire of ordnance raining down from every compass point. Those who escaped carried harrowing tales back to Germany, claiming that American guns fired without any warning signal. To them, it appeared as if the shells materialized out of thin air. By December 1944, American artillery grew even more fearsome with the introduction of the proximity fuse known to soldiers as the funny fuse, or VT. Fuse, one of the war's most closely guarded secrets. The Pentagon had previously forbidden its deployment in ground operations. Their primary fear was that the enemy might salvage a dud round and reverse engineer the sophisticated technology. However, when Germany launched its desperate offensive in the Ardennes, General Eisenhower insisted on authorization to employ every available weapon. The VT fuse housed a miniature radar transmitter within its nose cone. Rather than detonating upon impact, the shell exploded automatically when it detected. It was close to the ground, typically at a height of 20 to 50 feet. An airburst was catastrophic for troops in the open, as shrapnel rained down from above, piercing foxholes and trenches that offered protection only against ground-level blasts. When combined with time-on-target tactics, the proximity fuse elevated American artillery to a level of effectiveness that seemed bordering on the supernatural. German infantrymen, who believed themselves secure within their fortified positions, suddenly found death descending from the heavens with absolutely no preamble. The Battle of the Bulge served as the ultimate crucible for American artillery crews. On December 16, 1944, more than 200,000 German troops slammed into thinly defended American lines in the Ardennes forest, achieving total surprise. Although German armor drove deep into Allied territory, the artillery refused to yield. At Dom-Butgenbach, located on the northern shoulder of the Bulge, German forces were on the verge of a breakthrough, threatening the 2nd Infantry Division with annihilation. American artillery interceded with devastating precision, delivering over 10,000 rounds in a single 8-hour span to turn the tide. For the American soldiers, shivering in their foxholes, paralyzed by the biting cold and the terror of the front lines, that rumble on the horizon was far more than mere sound. It was the symphony of survival, the only barrier holding back a slaughter. The enemy offensive hit an impenetrable wall. On the northern flank, the artillery of 4 distinct divisions harmonized under a unified command structure. 348 heavy cannons, alongside a battalion of 4.2-inch mortars, roared in unison, guided by a single central authority. Enemy units that had managed to breach the infantry lines were immediately pulverized by a converging deluge of explosives. Then the battlefield changed forever with the introduction of the proximity fuse. General George Patton was not a man easily dazzled by new machinery. He favored the dash of mobile warfare and aggressive strikes rather than passive reliance on bombardment. Yet this innovation altered his perspective completely. In correspondence with the War Department, Patton vividly detailed the destruction wrought upon an exposed German battalion. He described the new projectile equipped with the novel fuse as utterly catastrophic for the opposition. He noted that they had intercepted a hostile battalion traversing the Sauer River, resulting in a confirmed death toll of 702 soldiers, an exact tally, not an approximation. When the smoke lifted, the troops were obliged to traverse the terrain and count the fallen individually. A single concentrated barrage had erased a complete military unit. With over 700 men eliminated in mere moments, Patton remarked that once all armies possessed this munition, the very nature of combat would require revision. Such a statement was remarkable coming from a commander who championed the charge over the weight. It was the highest acclaim possible, concluding with his gratitude that the United States had developed the technology first. The psychological impact of these variable time-fused barrages pushed the opposing forces beyond the limits of human endurance. Near Malmedy, American artillery units defending the town unleashed these air-bursting shells upon the advancing ranks. The American defenders witnessed a shocking spectacle, German troops sprinting headlong into the bombardment, shrieking the word for surrender. One must consider the magnitude of horror necessary to compel a soldier to run toward the instruments of his own destruction. This was not a calculated maneuver, but a flight of primal terror, a desperate compulsion to escape the lethal rain from above. When intelligence officers later questioned the survivors of the Bulge regarding their greatest fear, the response was uniform. They did not fear the biting winter or the armored divisions. They feared the shells that detonated in the air. Following the cessation of hostilities, intelligence teams conducted systematic interviews with captured German leadership. Their accounts were strikingly similar. Officers who had previously scoffed at American infantry as over-equipped amateurs expressed nothing but profound reverence for the artillery corps. Their insights highlighted a crucial distinction: when fired upon, the British would retaliate and reposition to a more advantageous location. The Americans, however, responded differently. Rather than maneuvering, they simply saturated the entire grid square with a punishing, inescapable storm of steel. Upon the cessation of fire, the Americans would launch their assault before the dust had settled, a strategy of overwhelming violence that dismantled German defensive theory. Trained to withstand an initial blow and then counterstrike, the enemy found themselves denied any chance to recover. A captured officer succinctly captured this disparity. He observed that the British fired and then paused to correct their aim, whereas the Americans appeared to fire every available weapon simultaneously. By March of 1945, this artillery doctrine had accomplished feats previously unknown in the annals of war. At the crossing of the Rhine, Generals Simpson and Eisenhower stood on the western bank to witness 2,070 guns erupt in concert, delivering over 60,000 rounds in a single hour, the largest barrage of the conflict. This bombardment caused the German defenses on the opposite shore to simply evaporate. When the air cleared, the infantry crossed the river, meeting almost no resistance. The few survivors were left in a state of shock, leading Patton to proclaim later that artillery had been the decisive factor in the victory. While the time-on-target technique did not secure victory alone, no singular tool ever does it, was pivotal. It served as a testament to the distinct philosophy of the American armed forces regarding conflict. Where others depended on gallantry, the officers at Fort Sill had dedicated the interwar period to addressing combat challenges through engineering and mathematics. They sought to answer one fundamental inquiry: how to maximize enemy casualties while minimizing friendly losses. The solution lay in synchronization velocity and the precise application of overwhelming force. It was a strategy devoid of romance or tales of individual heroism, yet it was undeniably effective. The German veterans who endured this fire in France, Belgium, and Germany bore the psychological scars for the remainder of their days. They remembered the eerie quiet followed by the instant the sky seemed to tear apart. They recalled the utter helplessness, concluding that even the concept of hell paled in comparison to what they had survived. The quiet architects who refined the art of precision fire at Fort Sill remained in the shadows, their names unspoken in the halls of fame. Long before the first cannon spoke, they waged a silent battle of geometry and seconds, driven by duty rather than a hunger for prestige. Their calculations were a shield designed to bring our nation's sons back to their families, and the soldiers who walked off those fields alive recognized exactly who had been their salvation.